In the dead of night on October the 6th, the sky over Crimea erupted in fire. This made the Russians panic twice, first over what happened, and second when they realized where they'd been hit. They realized that Ukrainian drones had torn through Russian air defenses using a genius strategy. Not a big deal, until they discovered where those drones had hit, and why that strike would haunt them for very long. That night, Ukraine didn't just strike targets, it struck at the very balance of Russia's war machine. Some people would hate this getting exposed, and will definitely try to suppress it in the algorithm, except you can fight back simply by clicking the like button. Thank you. On October 6th, Ukrainian drones tore through Russian defenses, striking the Feodosia oil terminal. It was a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm Russia's mammoth air defenses. To tackle this, they had a genius strategy. Ukraine's military planners likely understood that hitting only one major oil facility, such as Feodosia, would trigger an immediate S-400 air defense response, potentially neutralizing the attack before it reached its target. So instead, they split the assault, launching simultaneous strikes across multiple points inside Russia-controlled territory. And as the night sky over Crimea burned red, the echoes of another explosion, far beyond the front lines, signaled that Ukraine's long-range campaign had only just begun. While Feodosia burned, another wave of drones targeted an ammunition depot belonging to Russia's 18th Combined Arms Army, severing a vital link in the Kremlin's supply chain across occupied Crimea. By hitting both an oil refinery and a military weapons facility at the same time, Ukraine forced Russia into a deadly dilemma. Which one do you save? Your fuel or your firepower? Hundreds of kilometers inside Russia, deep in Nizhny Novgorod Oblast, Ukrainian drones struck the Sverdlov plant, one of Russia's largest and most secretive weapons facilities. Located in the city of Dzержinsk, nearly 800 kilometers or 497 miles from the Ukrainian border, the plant is a cornerstone of Russia's military industry, producing everything from artillery and aircraft shells to guided air bombs, anti-tank missile warheads, and precision-guided munitions. The plant is on the sanctions lists of the European Union, Ukraine, the US, the UK, Japan, and Switzerland. However, it is still one of the largest producers of industrial explosives in Russia, manufacturing transfer charges for the mining industry, perforating charges for the oil and gas sector, and equipment for seismic and geophysical work. In October 2024, drones from Ukraine's Defense Intelligence and Security Service also attacked the Sverdlov plant, damaging the hexagen and octagen production workshop. But this time, the attack was far more brutal. The Ukrainian drones targeted multiple critical sections of the Sverdlov plant, causing massive explosions that not only damaged production facilities, but also disrupted Russia's ability to manufacture precision munitions at scale. But Russian air defenses aren't made to just watch their destruction. They acted fast. Moscow's defense ministry claimed it had intercepted 251 drones across the country that night, 20 over Nizhny Novgorod alone. Yet both the Feodosia oil terminal and the Sverdlov plant were destroyed. According to Ukraine's general staff, multiple explosions ripped through the complex, triggering a massive fire that could be seen for miles. The message to Moscow was unmistakable. Even deep within occupied territory, even beneath layers of air defense and propaganda, nowhere is safe. Ukraine knew its strike would make headlines for weeks, but this was not its goal. It was waiting for the real destruction Russia would face over months, even years, all for a single reason. The Feodosia oil terminal wasn't some normal place of infrastructure. It was the largest fuel storage facility on the occupied peninsula. But what I didn't tell you was that the Feodosia oil terminal was a Ukrainian company. It might sound weird until you realize the actual reason behind it were the deep scars Russia gave it back in 2014. Before 2014, Crimea was an autonomous republic within Ukraine. Its ports bustling, its industries thriving under Kyiv's control, but the city's Russian-speaking majority became the perfect tool for Moscow's propaganda campaign, a false narrative of protection used to justify a military takeover. After Russia's illegal annexation in 2014, the Feodosia oil terminal, once a Ukrainian state enterprise known as the Feodosia Enterprise to supply oil products, was seized. It was later folded into Chernomornaftogaz, a so-called Crimean state enterprise under Russian control. By 2019, it had been sold off for 651 million rubles to a shadowy company called Firma Gunas, headed by Valentin Dorosh, a retired colonel from Russia's Ministry of Internal Affairs. But make no mistake, this facility was no ordinary depot. It was the beating heart of Russia's occupation logistics. Linked by rail, sea and road, it stored and distributed up to 250,000 tons of fuel that powered tanks, aircraft and supplied convoys across occupied Ukrainian territory. And Ukraine's attack on this refinery was a big deal for Russia. Even more scary were the visuals eyewitnesses described. The explosions were massive, flames lighting up the horizon for miles. Reports from the Crimean wind channel described an inferno visible across the coastline, while secondary blasts thundered near Saki and Karcha airfields. Ukraine's general staff confirmed the strike, describing Feodosia as a critical hub, a transfer point for oil and petroleum products. This wasn't the first surprise Ukrainian ammunition gave to this hub. In early October 2024, Ukraine struck Feodosia's marine oil terminal. The strike sparked a massive fire, leading to a municipal technogenic emergency declaration. The depot's fuel tanks were severely damaged in the attack. Even this time when Ukraine attacked, it was a moment of chaos for the Russian command. Air defences scrambled, resources stretched thin, and confusion rippled across the occupied territories. But despite Russia's strong air defence system, Ukraine somehow found a way to fool it, a method so ruthless that Russia knows another strike could come at any moment. Yet, all it can do is watch the destruction unfold, completely helpless. On October the 3rd, 2025, just 3 days before the Feodosia strike, Ukrainian drones flew 1,500 kilometers or 232 miles deep into Russian territory, hitting the Nefteyorsk Syntes oil refinery, one of Russia's most vital energy hubs. Processing 6.6 million metric tons of crude per year, the refinery powers both Russia's military and its domestic economy. The destruction was mind-boggling. Gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, bitumen, everything that keeps the country moving, fighting and supplying its front lines flows from this single site. Videos posted online showed at least one drone crashing inside the refinery grounds, sending a column of black smoke high into the sky. Russia had a different view. Officials rushed to downplay the attack. Orenburg Governor Yevgeny Solintsev claimed no casualties and said operations were not disrupted, but the message was clear. Ukraine can reach the heart of Russia's energy empire. The destruction reminds me of the quote, "Only those who have something to lose feel fear, but those who fight for the pride of their country, they never yield." And that's exactly what the world is seeing now. Russia initially did so much damage that it became a do-or-die situation for Ukraine. They fought back, used every tactic that worked. One of them was the art of using drones. They mastered it so well that probably the whole world studies every move they make with drones, but Russia remained mostly unfazed. After all, how far can drones really fly? Unlike fighter jets, they have a limited range. Russia knew Ukraine couldn't hit distant targets, and it was right, only until it proved them wrong. A strategy so brilliant, Ukraine doesn't have to risk lives, doesn't have to spend billions on equipment, and still destroys Russia to its core. The day Ukraine struck the Nefteyorsk Syntes oil refinery, its forces also hit the Berezniki chemical complex, a staggering 1,700 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, nearly 1,000 miles deep into Russian territory. The twin explosions were so powerful that operations at the Azot chemical plant in Perm, Berezniki, were forced to halt that very evening. Azot is Russia's sole producer of ammonium nitrate, liquid ammonia, urea, nitric acid, and nitrate salts, materials critical for both agriculture and explosives. Both facilities, far from the Ukrainian front lines, show how the war has entered a new phase. Ukraine is now targeting Russia's industrial lifelines, but all of it wouldn't have been possible without the special weapon Ukraine used. Hitting Russia's biggest refineries wasn't easy. It couldn't use conventional bombers and massive air raids, but they still succeeded. This was the work of AN-196 Lyudyi drones, long-range machines capable of flying up to 1,500 kilometers or 930 miles. Each strike penetrates deeper into Russian territory, bypassing air defences and targeting the infrastructure Russia depends on to operate as a nation. The success was so massive it became a new normal. September alone saw 19 major Russian energy and industrial facilities struck. Razizon, Saratov, Kiroy, Nova, Astran refineries, gas plants, depots, pumping stations all hit, one after another. Every attack forces emergency repairs, rerouting of logistics, and emergency drawdowns, but the damage is compounding. Ukraine isn't after stunts, it's targeting the core lifelines: fuel, fertilizer, munitions, and industrial hubs. The very arteries that keep Russia running. With each drone strike, the Russian supply chain frays further, revealing cracks no propaganda can hide. Even the videos of destruction started going viral, so the world had clear proof. Except this wasn't even the real motive of Ukraine. The world thought the goal was destruction of oil refineries, but it was something that started showing its effects months after the real strikes. While Moscow's officials scrambled to spin the story, the public saw the truth. Limits are imposed on only 30 litres of diesel per purchase, and panic buying is spreading insanely fast. This is just the trailer, a trailer for Russian citizens and an end for the government across occupied Crimea and Sevastopol. Fuel shortages have worsened dramatically. Nationwide data from 17,000 gas stations shows that the Southern Federal District, which Moscow falsely includes Crimea within, is among the worst affected, with 14% of stations suspending fuel cells entirely. According to reports, occupation authorities in Crimea have frozen fuel prices for 30 days. This comes as shortages worsen after Ukrainian drone strikes targeted Russian refineries. Gas stations have run dry, long lines stretch down empty roads, and frustration among Russian forces is growing. Russian outlet Izvestia says that fuel prices have jumped 40 to 50% since the start of the year, adding even more inflationary pressure on the public. This might cause a revolt against Putin. No, not just for increasing fuel prices. With gas prices soaring, many Russian gas station owners are at risk of going out of business. On September 24th, Kommersant reported that roughly half of the stations in occupied Crimea and Sevastopol had completely stopped selling gasoline due to severe supply disruptions. These shortages follow a wave of Ukrainian drone strikes that swept through Russia's oil network in August. The Financial Times reports that 16 of Russia's 38 oil refineries have been hit since August 2025, driving diesel exports to their lowest level since 2020. This was a crippling blow to the Kremlin's wartime economy. You'll understand it better when you look at the numbers. As of late September, 38% of Russia's primary oil refining capacity, roughly 338,000 tons per day, was offline. Around 70% of these fuel outages were caused by Ukrainian drone strikes, which managed to knock out roughly a quarter of Russia's total oil refining capacity, about 236,000 tons per day. Gasoline and diesel production fell 6% in August and another 18% in September, leaving a 1 million ton shortfall, equivalent to 20% of domestic consumption. The disaster is spreading dangerously fast. Fuel shortages have hit over 20 regions, from Sakhalin to Nizhny Novgorod, with the Far East and Crimea the hardest hit. In response, Moscow has banned gasoline exports and is scrambling to import fuel to stabilize the domestic market. And now, the story takes us even deeper into Russia's industrial heartland. The Russian Fuel Union has warned that gas station profitability has gone negative, with wholesale prices in some regions now matching or even exceeding retail prices. Shipment delays of up to 2 months are draining capital and forcing closures among independent operators, who run about 60% of Russia's stations. And why do you need proof when top Russian intellectuals are saying it? Russian economist Vladislav Inozemtsev says Ukraine has hit the nail on the head by targeting refineries, creating the most complex fuel crisis Russia has faced in years. He estimates that over 300 independent fuel retailers have already been forced to shut down since May. But I know what you're thinking. Russia just kept watching? Didn't it strike back? Russia was furious, watching one after another of its refineries go up in flames under Ukrainian drone attacks. And in the early hours following Ukraine's deep strikes into Russian territory, the Kremlin struck back with rage. Missiles and drones rained down across Ukraine in one of the largest overnight assaults of the year. At least 5 civilians were killed, among them an entire family in the western region of Lviv, their home reduced to rubble. For hours, the night sky burned. 140 drones and 23 missiles launched in a wave of destruction. Explosions echoed over Lviv, Kherson, Vinnytsia, Chernihiv, and Odessa. This was just the beginning. Energy facilities were hit, gas pipelines damaged, and more than 73,000 homes plunged into darkness. In hindsight, Russia showed why it is called one of the most powerful countries in the world, but the depth of it showed the real truth behind it. Russia's revenge seemed powerful, but it also showed a desperate show of power as winter closes in and diplomacy collapses. But the strikes also reveal something else: Moscow's fear. Because for every missile it fires, Ukraine's drones strike deeper, cutting off the fuel that kept those very missiles flying. The lights went out in Russia also. On October the 5th, a wave of Ukrainian strikes hit the city of Belgorod, knocking out major energy facilities and plunging entire neighborhoods into darkness. Nearly 40,000 residents were left without electricity as explosions tore through 7 municipalities, crippling power lines and transformers across the region. Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov called it significant damage. Hospitals switched to emergency power, schools shut down, and the city fell into a tense, uneasy quiet. Even a day later, over 24 settlements remained without power. An intercepted phone call, released by Ukraine's military intelligence, captured the chaos. All of Shcherbekino was without power, just when Russia was still recovering from these scars, and Ukraine gave it the ones everyone is talking about now. Ukraine strategically attacked Feodosia oil terminal and Nizhny Novgorod Oblast artillery facility on 6th of October. And now the picture grows even darker for Russia, because fuel is not only necessary for the economy, but also the backbone of Russian military. Tanks, once the spear of their assaults, now make up only 4% of offensive operations, only because of lack of fuel. More than 90% of attacks are carried out using unarmoured vehicles, pickup trucks, vans, quad bikes, motorcycles, even golf carts. The world's second largest army has been grounded by a lack of fuel, reduced to improvisation on a catastrophic scale. On the other hand, Ukraine's drones, precise and relentless, are reshaping the very geometry of warfare. Kill zones are set, supply lines cut, and every advance by Russia is met with devastating losses. What options remain for Moscow? Very few. And the question isn't whether Russia can win, it's whether it can survive at all, because despite years of Western sanctions, Russia has poured billions into its war machine and thought it still had chances only till these numbers started showing up. 3.5 years into the conflict, the cost is catching up. Russia is stalling and the budget deficit is widening at an alarming rate. In a stark reversal of earlier promises, President Vladimir Putin has allowed the government to raise the value-added tax from 20 to 22%. Moscow claims the extra funds will go towards defense and security, but the reality is clear. The war economy is bleeding the nation dry. Every strike on fuel depots, refineries and chemical plants isn't just a battlefield victory for Ukraine, it's a hammer blow for Russia's financial backbone. An illegal tool Russia was secretly using to fund its war, and almost no one knew about it. They are named the shadow ships. They are often aging tankers with obscured identities and ownership, travel under flags of convenience, lack proper insurance, and use deceptive practices, such as turning off their automatic identification system, AIS, to avoid detection. Ukrainian intelligence reported that Russia's shadow fleet had grown to nearly 1,000 outdated vessels with a combined deadweight capacity of over 100 million tons. Investigations combining satellite imagery from environmental NGO SkyTruth and shipping data from Kepler revealed that at least 5 Russian shadow tankers leaked oil off Europe's shores. Large oil spills caused by such vessels could cost up to 1.4 billion euros, with European taxpayers likely liable if the ship owners cannot be traced. The report by Source Material and Politico highlighted Europe's inability to fully rein in the fleet, noting that 2 of the vessels had already been individually sanctioned by the UK. A UK Foreign Office spokesperson described the shadow fleet as Putin's desperate and dangerous attempt to cling onto his oil profits while polluting the sea, warning that ships ignore basic safety standards, raising the risk of catastrophic spills. Europe and Ukraine were all fed up with it until Ukraine found a genius no-brainer solution to it. They said, if we cannot catch them in the seas, we will destroy them at their source. Ukraine started targeting the shadow ships before they even left Russia, while they were still waiting to be loaded with oil. Over the past year, Ukraine struck multiple shadow ships. While European sanctions and stricter monitoring have made it incredibly difficult for Russia to transport oil, this secretive network of Russia is designed to keep Moscow's war chest full, and Ukraine has made it a top priority target. Ukraine has even begun targeting Russia's shadow ships to choke off its oil and gas exports. These shadow ships are clandestine vessels that operate to evade international sanctions, regulations, and scrutiny, primarily for transporting sanctioned goods like oil. Russia knows how nasty this is going to be, and just for a single reason. Oil revenues account for roughly a quarter of Russia's federal budget, and the root of that entire war funding. So this time, Europe said no. Finnish Energy Minister Sari Multala called for the EU to expand sanctions to cover the entire value chain involved in transporting sanctioned oil. The European Commission pledged continued action against enablers such as refineries and commercial registries, while maintaining diplomatic pressure on nations still facilitating the fleet. The EU's 19th package of sanctions, announced on September the 19th, targeted an additional 118 vessels from Russia's shadow fleet. Russia's economy, long propped up by oil exports, military production, and fertilizers, is now facing a perfect storm. Ukraine has systematically targeted all three sectors, hitting oil refineries, weapons plants, and chemical facilities that produce fertilizers and explosives. With international sanctions biting hard, Russia is increasingly unable to even sell its products on the black market, while domestic shortages and price hikes compound the crisis. The cracks in Russia's economy are no longer hidden. Ordinary citizens are feeling the pinch, taxes are rising, supply chains are straining, and basic goods are becoming harder to obtain. The pressure is fueling growing dissatisfaction, with voices increasingly raised against Putin's authoritarian rule. Even industries not directly taxed, like fitness and health, are feeling the impact. Prices for sports supplements, equipment, and even legal services are rising. Every part of daily life, even small business, is paying the price. Fuel shortages, destroyed refineries, and crippled logistics are not just military problems anymore, they are bleeding into the civilian economy. The Russian government is scrambling for revenue, but every step only deepens the crisis. And in the midst of it all, Ukraine's strikes continue, crippling the infrastructure Russia depends on. The once mighty economy is showing its vulnerability. Every explosion, every drone strike, every supply gap adds to the pressure. Numbers don't lie about it. In Russia, the economic pressure on ordinary citizens is mounting. Taxes are rising for the second consecutive year. Since early 2025, a progressive personal income tax of up to 22% and a 25% corporate tax have been in effect. For small businesses, the VAT exemption threshold has been slashed from around 60 million rubles to just 10 million rubles in annual revenue. The Kremlin hopes the new tax hikes will fill its empty coffers, bringing in an estimated 1.3 trillion rubles, or about $15.5 billion a year. But the numbers tell a darker story. According to Kommersant, Russia's finance ministry quietly forecast that the country's GDP growth will drop to just 1% this year, down from the earlier 2.5% projection. And for 2026, growth could fall to barely 0.5%, far below the government's original target of 3%. Life in Moscow may seem superficially normal. Shops and restaurants are open, but fewer people can afford to buy clothes or dine out. With the rising VAT and ongoing inflation, the strain on everyday Russians is growing. Even in the capital, residents report struggling with the rising cost of living, a pressure that will only intensify as the war drags on, and the Kremlin tries to fund its military ambitions. Yet despite the mounting domestic strain and a faltering economy, Putin shows no sign of backing down. But the question is stark. Even if he somehow achieves limited battlefield gains, what will he truly win? Since February 24th, 2022, the day the world changed, Russia has seized more than 28,000 square miles of Ukrainian land. That's 12% of Ukraine, an area nearly half the size of Iowa. Add Crimea and the occupied Donbas territories, and Russia now holds 19% of Ukraine. That's the size of Ohio, under the control of the Kremlin's forces. And the war isn't slowing down. Between July the 15th and August the 12th, 2025, Russia gained another 241 square miles, a 7% jump from the month before. In just 1 week, 76 square miles fell under Russian control, a 145% surge in territorial gains. Yet, amid this wave of advances, Ukraine still holds its tiny foothold inside Russia, 4 square miles across the Kursk and Belgorod regions. But here's the real question. It's not about how much land Russia has grabbed or how much Ukraine still holds. The real question is, can Russia even feed the people living in these areas, especially when its businesses are cut off from the world and normal life impossible? Sustaining civilians is becoming a nightmare. From Kyiv to Kharkiv, from the Dnipro to Donbas, cities tremble under Russia's relentless bombardment. 9 months of diplomacy, summits in Saudi Arabia, Oval Office meetings, even a face-to-face between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Anchorage have failed to stop the bloodshed. Europe debates peacekeepers for a ceasefire that never comes. The United States pushes for negotiations that go nowhere. Tactically, Russian troop movements in 2025 and statements from the Kremlin show that Moscow's main goal is to capture the remaining towns in Donetsk, where Ukraine still controls about 25% of the region. The summer campaign gave Russia some tactical gains, but no breakthroughs big enough to change the course of the war. August attacks on Lyman, a key logistics hub near Sloviansk, point to possible Russian flanking strikes on Donetsk towns in late 2025 or early 2026. Russia has been losing roughly 100 to 150 troops per square kilometre of territory it gains. This war in Ukraine is Russia's second deadliest conflict in a century, with total Russian casualties nearing 1 million, a number almost equal to all Russian and Soviet wars combined since World War II. Even with these losses, the Kremlin's political objectives and strategic plans haven't really changed. The high cost of the conflict has led analysts and even the Trump administration to assume Russia should want the war to end. Logically, that makes sense. But Putin isn't focused on Russia's national interests, or even on improving the lives of its citizens. For him, the war is part of a century-long struggle against the West and a way to cement his place in history as one of Russia's great leaders. Because of that, his tolerance for risk is extremely high. He's not fighting for small territorial gains, he's fighting for his legacy. The only thing that could likely change his approach is if continuing the war threatened the security of his rule. And that's why he's not even hesitating to target Ukraine's nuclear power plant, even near Chernobyl, where the risk of radioactive catastrophe looms like a shadow over all of Europe. Each strike carries a silent warning, a reminder of how far Moscow is willing to go. And maybe that's why Ukraine's military is strategically targeting Russian oil refineries, weapons facilities, and chemical plants. To cut off resources Russia needs to keep fighting. But this strategy comes with risks. If Russia hits Ukraine's power plants again during the upcoming winter, life could get extremely difficult for civilians. Without electricity and freezing temperatures, survival becomes a real challenge, and the war could turn even more brutal and unpredictable for both sides. However, Ukraine still has the backing of US and Europe, support that continues to keep its economy and defense alive. But the real question now is, can Russia survive this war through the winter? Without oil, without electricity, and with no permanent allies left to rely on? This is something only time can tell.